Today I want to talk to you about skepticism. Skepticism is something you find all over the place. There are many people who count themselves skeptics about particular areas. You might be skeptical of people's claims about the coronavirus, for example. You might be skeptical about anybody's view concerning the existence or non-existence of alien beings. You might be skeptical of reports of UFOs or a variety of other things. There are many people who are skeptical about religion or about particular religious claims at any rate. There are many people who are skeptical about all sorts of things. They just distrust them. And so what does it mean to be a skeptic about such a particular area? Well, it really means to believe that, look, nothing is known, or in an even more extreme sense, that nothing can even be rationally believed about that sort of area. You might, for example, be a skeptic about the existence of life on other planets and say, look, I don't see how really we could have any significant evidence for or against the question, so I'm skeptical, I suspend judgment. I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else does either. So there's a couple of different ways of thinking about what skepticism itself is. Often in a modern context, it's described as the view that nothing is known. In fact, Francisco Sanchez, a Spanish skeptic, put it in exactly that way. He said, "Let this be my creed, that nothing is known." However, ancient skeptics tended to have a broader and even more extreme view. They thought it wasn't just a question of not knowing anything. After all, you might say, well, I don't really know, but I think I have pretty good reason to believe this. Instead, they said, you don't. That is to say, there is no such thing as rational belief. You have no reason to believe something as opposed to its opposite, no matter what the question is, they thought. And that brings us to the second really important distinction. It's one thing to be skeptical about a particular topic, a particular area, a particular kind of thing. It's quite another to be skeptical about everything. Philosophical skepticism is the view that we can't be sure of anything, that we have no reason to think we know anything, that, well, let's be more careful here, that there's no such thing as reasonable belief about anything. It's meant to be a global skepticism. As we'll see, it doesn't always achieve that. But the general idea of a philosophical skepticism is we're skeptical not just about this area or that area, but about everything. We think it is impossible to have rational belief about anything at all. So, we can characterize skepticism in a couple of different ways. We could think of it as focused on knowledge, as many philosophers do these days, and think that it amounts to the claim, as Sanchez put it, that nothing is known. Or we could say it's actually even more radical than that. It's really about reasonable belief. It is never reasonable to believe one thing as opposed to its opposite. So we could say nothing is even reasonably believed. Now that's a pretty extreme view. There's another distinction we can make with respect to skepticism. In the ancient world, it was known as the distinction between academic skeptics and Pyrrhonian skeptics, Pyrrho being the founder of that particular approach to skepticism. The academic skeptic says nothing is known. Knowledge is impossible, or even rational belief is impossible. There's never any reason to believe one thing as opposed to its opposite. Now notice the academic skeptic is making an assertion. They're claiming nothing is known. As Sanchez says, "Let this be my creed, nothing is known." They are claiming that rational belief is impossible. They're, in short, putting forward a claim. And so the academic skeptic is someone who is making an assertion, saying this. Now, it makes them vulnerable to a certain kind of charge. Wait a minute. Are you sure? Do you know? Do you think it's reasonable to believe that there's no such thing as reasonable belief? That sounds like a contradiction. And indeed, there's a famous statement of Socrates reported by Diogenes Laertius, where Socrates says, "I know only that I know nothing." Now, when you think about that, you might think, that doesn't make any sense at all. What do you mean, you know only that you know nothing? If you know that, then you know something. So you can't possibly know that. There's something incoherent about the very thought. Now, there might be a way of actually fixing this. It requires a little bit of self-reference, but maybe I can say, well, I believe only this. Only what, Socrates? What I just said. I believe this and this alone. Okay. That might be consistent. But there's something very strange about it, and it's hard to imagine how that alone could be a reasonable belief. And so, if we think of things in that term, you might say, yeah, academic skepticism seems odd. The academic skeptic is forced to assert something like nothing is known or nothing is reasonably believed, but either that seems arbitrary or it seems in some sense contradictory, at least if you think the commitment underlying that assertion that nothing is reasonably believed is that it's reasonable to believe that nothing is reasonably believed. The Pyrrhonian skeptic, therefore, doesn't make any such assertion, but instead says, do I know anything? Do I have reason to believe anything? I don't know. I don't think I have any reason to believe that I do. I don't think I have any reason to believe that I don't. So the Pyrrhonian skeptic is really even more extreme than the academic skeptic. Do you know anything? You ask the academic skeptic, they say no. Ask the Pyrrhonian skeptic, and they say, I don't know. I don't know if I know anything. So that's something that is at least consistent. Now, some academic skeptics think, well, wait a minute, surely this is some kind of trick, because in giving us arguments for your position, you really are claiming to know something, or at least have reason to believe something, even if the conclusion from that is that there is no such thing as reasonable belief. But the Pyrrhonian skeptic sometimes retreats to saying, actually, I can make no assertions at all. There's another problem, we might say, that faces skepticism, however we think of it, along Pyrrhonian lines or academic lines. And that is to say that almost always, skeptics want to make some kind of recommendation on the basis of what they say. They don't simply leave it at, hey, nothing is known, or there's no reason to believe anything. Instead, they go on to say, so, and then make a claim. Something like, so, we should suspend judgment. So, have peace of mind, relax, don't make any commitments. And however they do that, and by the way, there are a variety of recommendations they make. Some say, for example, it's impossible to know anything, so have faith. Substitute faith for knowledge. Others, like Santayana, will say, well, in the end, there's just animal faith. We can't know anything. We don't even have any reason to believe things ultimately. But nevertheless, our animal natures force us to act as if we did have beliefs. Just go with it. That's something that is a kind of recommendation. And on the basis of what? So you might think the skeptic makes some kind of thesis statement like this, and then makes some recommendation. And then a variety of things follow there. So suspend judgment, so relax, have peace of mind, so have faith, whatever it is. But the point is, there is presumably some connection between the thesis and the recommendation. So Gisela Stryker, for example, has talked about the problem of how we would get from here to here. Is the skeptic in effect saying that if these things are true, that it's reasonable to believe in the recommendation? If so, it looks like that undercuts the thesis. And so it's not entirely clear whether we can formulate skepticism in a fully coherent way. But we might be able to, and a variety of skeptics have argued that we can. Sometimes they think that the only recommendation we can make is to be silent. They think, to assert something, I've got to at least have reason to believe it. I never have any reason to believe anything, they think, or at least I have no reason to believe that I ever have reason to believe anything. And so we might say, at most I should just be quiet. Other people think, no, there is a way to live that follows from this skeptical assumption. The Pyrrhonian skeptic sometimes, because of this problem, makes no recommendation. Simply says, I don't see how I have reason to believe anything, so I believe I have no reason. No, I don't even believe that. I don't think there's any reason for that. I have no reason. Well, gosh, I can't even say this. That's the problem. Can you even articulate the position? Often what this sort of Pyrrhonian skeptic does is what Nagarjuna and other Madhyamaka Buddhist skeptics do in India. They simply say, look, if I were to make a proposition, then I'd be in error. But I make no proposition, therefore I'm not in error. In effect, they say, look, I'm not making any assertion at all. You guys make assertions, you dogmatists. And then I attack you. I try to show that on your assumptions it all falls apart. But then if you turn and say, well, what do you think, Nagarjuna? What's your view? I say nothing. Okay, I make no assertions. I wait for you to make assertions, and I attack you. And I try to show that you're not justified in believing what you believe. But then you say, well, what do you think? A mum. I say nothing. And so that's one strategy. Another is the strategy of Sextus Empiricus. He says, look, I'm not making any recommendation, but I am telling you that peace of mind, for example, simply follows from adopting a skeptical attitude. And there's a marvelous quotation from Sextus that goes like this. The skeptic, in fact, had the same experience which is said to have befallen the painter Apelles. Once, they say, when he was painting a horse and wished to represent in the painting the horse's foam, he was so unsuccessful that he gave up the attempt and flung at the picture the sponge he used to wipe the paint off his brush. The mar of the sponge produced the effect of a horse's foam. So too the skeptics were in hopes of gaining quietude by means of a decision regarding the disparity of the objects of sense and of thought. And being unable to effect this, they suspended judgment, and they found that quietude, as if by chance, followed upon their suspense, even as a shadow follows its substance. So the point is, look, it's not an assertion that you ought to have peace of mind or you ought to suspend judgment. There's no claim here that suspending judgment will lead to peace of mind, or that the difficulties in coming to a reasonable belief should lead you to suspend judgment. No, instead, there's simply an observation. Just, hey, here's what happened to me. I thought about these arguments. I suspended judgment. I became tranquil. I attained quietude. I had peace of mind. Am I making any claim about anything else? No. Okay? I'm not claiming anything about the world. Here's another way, and I think a deeper way of thinking about skepticism. Why should we think that there's a difficulty about knowing anything, or about coming to a reasonable belief about anything? There is a gap between our beliefs, or our perceptual states, in general our mental states, and the world. So one way of thinking about the problem of skepticism is to think that here we have the world. And it's really a problem about mind and world. Here I am, let's say, and I have these thoughts about the world. And I'd like to think there's some relationship between those thoughts and the world. Now, sometimes it's a question of a belief or a thought that I'm entertaining about the world. It might be a perceptual state, maybe a visual perception, an auditory perception, some kind of experience I have. But in any case, here I have a mental state. And down at this level is a state of the world, the way things really are. And now the question is, well, do these match up? And do I have any reason to believe that they match? Here's the worry that the skeptic is going for, and that all skeptical arguments, I think, are structured around. Why should I believe that there's such a match? In a case where there's a match, and by the way, I don't mean anything mysterious here, and I don't think the skeptic means anything mysterious. Sometimes I see things that are really there. Other times I might see something and it turns out it's not there. And so I see what I thought was a flash of light, but I turn around, there's no evidence of a flash of light, no one else saw it. I end up concluding, that was some weird kind of illusion. And in fact, that's going to be one of the main arguments for skepticism, the argument from illusion. But that might be a case where, that's a perceptual state that might not match the world at all. And so that mismatch is possible. Sometimes I have beliefs that turn out to be wrong. If I believe that Concord is the capital of New Hampshire, that's a match. It really is the capital of New Hampshire. But if someone believes that Concord is the capital of Vermont, well, they're wrong. That's Montpelier. They've got the wrong state or the wrong city. And so that's not a match. Lots of our beliefs turn out to be wrong in that way. They don't match the state of the world. Our perceptual states can fail to match the state of the world. And so these kinds of mismatches can take place. Now, do we in general have a way of telling when our perceptual state or our belief state matches the world? We don't. At least that's the claim of the skeptic. And in fact, they might go even further. They might say it's not just that in a particular case we might be wrong, we might be globally wrong. And so we're going to look at arguments for global skepticism that say it's not just that in this particular case or in that particular case we become convinced there's a mismatch, and gosh, that could be happening to us at any point in time. They say actually there's the possibility that all those beliefs are wrong at once, and that's an even more radical claim. But it's really about this question of how our mental states connect to the states of the world. And so many skeptics, not all, but many skeptics will say, I'm not really worried about the problem of mental states about my own mental states. Now, I might also be often wrong about the mental state I'm in, but even if I'm pretty sure that that looks green to me or that this looks blue, fine. I'm not really interested in challenging that, most skeptics say. I want to challenge whether I have any reason to believe that my mental state matches the state of the world. And so that's a problem that I think any philosopher has to deal with. It is the problem of mind and world. Why should I think there is any particular connection between the way my mind is and the way the world is, between my mental states and the state of the world? It's a hard problem. And even if it is possible for them to match up, even if it's possible for me to have reasonable beliefs about that matching and about the connection, I need to know what that connection is. So this is one aspect of a general problem about how mind and world relate. The skeptic is, in a sense, taking an extreme position about that, saying we can't say anything about how they relate, we have no way of knowing how they connect, and so we're really better off assuming nothing about the state of the world and simply reporting our own mental states, but not giving any indication about the world, because every time we do that, we're in danger.